Hello, and welcome to Mentor Dino. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of Mentor Dino. I firmly believe that architecture, engineering, and construction professionals can achieve true success by embracing human skills as their guiding principle. So each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the AEC industry as a way to share stories, inspiration, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So if you like this episode, please do me a favor and hit subscribe, like, or leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own career journey. So let's dive in. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the Mentor Dino podcast. I would like to welcome Tara Labosky, architect and principal of Luzerne Consulting in New Freedom, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Tara, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Great. Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
And I know I heard a little bit about your story attending your presentation at the AIA National Conference, but if you don't mind introducing yourself to my listeners to give them a little bit more information about your experience and journey so far in your education and career.
Great. So about a year and a half ago, I launched Luzerne Consulting, which is a project and construction management firm or an owner's rep. So from my experience working both as an architect and a construction manager and also working in land development, I found that sometimes clients needed a little bit of help. They didn't realize kind of the full scope of what needed to be done. So the idea of the firm came to help kind of the smaller clients. Obviously, I don't compete with the major construction management firms, but to help this, the goal to help this small businesses or faith-based organizations or nonprofits, if they're renovating their space or if they need just help with permitting or help with contractors. So my career started going back to the 8th grade. I just, for some reason, got interested in houses. And in junior high, we had to do research on a couple of different professions. So I picked architecture and surveying. So this was on film strips back in like 40 years ago. So I think that's how I found out about NCARB or NAEB. So understanding like what I needed to do to go to architecture school. So in high school, I was able to take drafting, blueprint reading, electricity, and got that good base of understanding, what was involved. And went to college, Kent State, just like you. And after school, I was thinking about doing graduate work at the San Francisco Institute of Architecture. So I moved out there, did take some classes, but I worked for a microbrewery for about a year, and that gave me some good understanding of how a business works. Just learned a little bit about HR and accounts receivable, accounts payable. But I eventually got a job at an architecture firm, a very small firm where we did a lot of multifamily housing. And so after about 7 years in the San Francisco area, I moved back east. I had a job opportunity in Baltimore. So the firm I went to was pretty similar, did a lot of multifamily housing. And at some point, I made a decision to change jobs. I wanted to grow my career. So the next firm was, we did some multifamily housing, but also some commercial, some religious work and K through 12 schools. So, just kind of spreading out a little bit more. And I had more opportunities to do some contract administration, which I really started to develop an interest in. So when I was about 20 years after my bachelor's, I decided to go back to school for construction management at Drexel. And I had been thinking about graduate school, but couldn't decide on what I wanted to do. So I thought it was a good related field. And, again, I like being out on site. So my goal was always to work, as a construction manager for buildings, but I was connected with a guy who he was an owner's rep for land development projects, a civil engineer we both knew connected us. And so I ended up doing that for about 8.5 years, and I learned a lot. Just most of my projects in the past were redevelopments or renovations and additions. So I never was really involved with a great amount of site work. So I ended up changing jobs, and that job wasn't what I expected. So about 2 years ago, I said, I'm just going to go out on my own. And, now you're kind of in the fetal position crying, like, how am I going to pay my bills and everything? But it's been really exciting. I've met a lot of new people. I think sometimes I'm getting overloaded with just going to webinars and, reading things, but it's been really good. It's been exciting time.
I think that's the common theme, because I've had a couple episodes now where it's people have recently gone off on their own, or they're still within the first couple years, and it's a big roller coaster ride. Like, the ups and downs are more extreme than when you're just an employee.
Yes.
Because you have that other panic on, like, okay, how can I put food on the table? How am I going to pay my bills? And not just, oh, this project really sucks today and I'm just not having a good time, and you still get a check at the end of the day.
Right.
But I know you shifted more into construction management. Do you have any advice for anybody in school now looking for like a minor, being a fellow Kent grad? I know they now have construction management. They had it while I was there, and I ended up not taking it. But whenever I was looking for a minor, and you go to any of the counselors that have no idea about architecture, they're like, oh, just go get a business minor. And I did that. But like, as I grow in my career, I'm like, oh, I should have gone into construction management and done a minor in that, or even marketing and sales to like help on the BD front. So I don't know if you have any advice on what it's like studying for construction management.
I would definitely. When I was at Kent, the only related field we had program was interior design, and I don't think we were really allowed to take their classes at that time. So it is really nice to see they have landscape architecture, I think, and construction management. But and obviously, in architecture for 5 years, you're overloaded with, structures and MEP. But I think it's a good focus that can be applied to the profession as well. And it really gives you a good understanding of how contractors think, because I think that's something that that I've seen, that, the design side and the construction side don't really understand each other. And so just learning, some basic business, one of the things we were told is to be profitable. And I know it sounds kind of, common sense, but it was about being intentionally thinking about, you have a company, you need to make money. And, I learned a lot about risk management and strategic management and, how to really plan a project and how to, formally schedule that. So it was really eye-opening when I took those classes, but I would definitely recommend, any student in architecture to, at the very least, if you can't minor, just take classes in similar fields because it just makes you, I know it sounds a little cheesy, about more well-rounded, but just understanding how your other people in the built environment work. And even if it's facilities management, I've gone to a few of NFMT in Baltimore, National Facilities Management Technology, and just listening to the facilities managers, you really understand, they're the clients a lot of the time, and understanding what they need. So I know, like me, you probably had just one semester professional practice, and it is a lot to cram in, understanding contracts and, the AIA or CSI manuals of practice. But there's, really so much more about how to run a business that's focused on, the built environment. And I would love to see design specific design management classes that, focus on how to run a firm.
Yeah, because we do have to be profitable. Like, that's how we survive.
Right.
If you're not profitable. And I know you shifted in, stepping away from being a full-time architect to that construction management role. And I know others that tend to want to do a pivot, no matter how adjacent or not adjacent that pivot is to architecture, can make that a very difficult decision. Was that hard for you, switching over and going back to school for construction management?
Not really. I think I got to a point in my career, I like to draw. I like the problem solving, but just sitting at a desk all day, drawing details, just really wasn't exciting. When I would do CA on a project, I love going out on site, just walking around and talking to the contractors. And, you really learn a lot from them. So it wasn't a hard choice at all. And I know this sounds bad, but I know another architect who also moved over into construction management. And we both had the same experience where we experienced a better salary doing the switch. And, that wasn't my only focus, but I did a couple CSI certifications. So I just found I really liked the overall, how projects are run and how to do them better. I just developed an interest in that.
Yeah. And I think the further along you get, the more and more you're like, okay, it's time
Right.
to shift on to something. What's it like working on land development projects?
A lot more exciting than what I thought. So the ones I worked on were, we did a lot in residential. So we worked for the actual entity developing the land, and then the home builders would come in and buy the lots. So we had kind of the big three packages were earthwork, utilities, and paving, but there were also some of the other packages we had to deal with, dry utilities, understanding, gas, electric, Verizon, Comcast, landscaping, sidewalks, the whole entitlement process about how long it takes for a project to get approved and all the steps you have to take. In Maryland, we had to deal with overcrowding in schools, and they would do tests to see if, this neighborhood school could accommodate all the new homes and students. We had some exciting projects. Maybe I geek out a little bit, but when we would do a couple bridges, we had an open section bridge. There were 25 sections, and it was coming from Pennsylvania down to Baltimore. And I was driving down I-83 and I saw a truck with it on there, and you get all excited. I think that's going to my project. So when they were being installed, we had a trail cam up, and we made a video to send around to people. And, we were out there with the drone and watching truck backs in, lifts up a section, installs it, puts the end walls and the wing walls in. It was really fun to see because you don't realize, and maybe really realize how much work has to go into the site before you can even start the building. As an architect, I never really experienced just because of the projects I worked on. And there were a lot of challenges that were kind of fun to solve. We would find abandoned wells that no one knew about. We found an 8,000 gallon fuel tank that was about a quarter of the way filled that nobody knew about. So just trying to work around everybody and get that, resolved was stressful, but it was pretty fun to, experience. And I tell people now I know more about street signs than I ever cared to know about, but, just the little things when you're driving around, how you get street lights in, make sure people can get electric, gas, irrigation, like your entrance monument. There's a lot of work involved that I never really thought of.
Yeah. I feel like as we get specialized or have experiences, then we end up with weird knowledge that people are like, how do you even know that? And you're like, well, I had this project, and dive into details. And I know architects typically don't really work on bridges much. Was it weird going from building to bridges as a project?
It was a big change. So, our job, we were the owner's rep. So, we didn't do the work specifically, but just, I was talking to the superintendent on that job and asked them, how do you run a crane? So, there's a whole science to it, understanding the weight and how far you're lifting it. And, dealing with Maryland Department of the Environment and even the Army Corps of Engineers, they get involved. So it's really helped me, talking with my students in my planning and scheduling class that, if you're doing work near a stream in Maryland, you can't work in that stream during certain times of the year because it's spawning season. So it really makes you understand that you have to think about how to incorporate things like that into your schedule that you never would have thought of. Dealing with the geotech engineers and, when we would have poor soil or we would have to blast rock. It was just I think the most I did on a project in land, we did, when I was working as an architect, we had a geothermal system. So I was standing on the roof taking pictures of them drilling all the wells. But that was pretty much, probably the biggest land portion when I worked as an architect. So it was, when you see the crews out using equipment and excavator, it takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill. And, talking with the estimators about paving and, paving sections and, special tests and inspections. It's really eye-opening. I'm glad I did it because I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, and it's all a great segue into my next question, because I know you're an adjunct faculty at the Community College of Baltimore County, teaching construction management now. So you mentioned your planning course, but what other types of classes do you teach for construction management?
I have a list.
Do you teach their whole department?
No, I just kind of fill in. So, planning and scheduling is one that one of my students actually gave me a review, and he said, we should have just thrown out the book and just did software, learn how to do scheduling software. But it's the book we use talks about all the background. So we learn about how to think of a network model, how to create a precedence diagram, which is, the basics of how scheduling works to, calculate your total duration of the project and then your float. And we talked about how to really accurately develop a duration for a task. So, the PERT method is one where you calculate the average by thinking of what your most, you think, we'll get it done in 5 days, but then the worst case scenario is 20. And then maybe we'll get it done in 15. So that was really interesting because, you always wonder, how do architects really put together their durations, and how do contractors do that as well to make sure that they capture all the time it takes to do the work. I also teach construction claims and changes. So not a lawyer, but we, talk about how to have a claims and changes management program in a firm. So, how do contractors, when they're putting together their proposed change order, how do they know what to put on there? Are they including all overhead and profit, the time to actually put that change order together? Are they reserving the right to have another change order down the line if there's some kind of a ripple effect? And in that class, we also talk about negotiations. When I was in grad school, I was introduced to the program on negotiation through Harvard Law School. So we did some role simulations and just understanding, when you're going to that situation, how do you negotiate if there's a claim? How do you try to work together and try to avoid escalating that claim to litigation? We also talk about differing site conditions. So the tank I mentioned that we found on that one job site, I had pictures. So I use that as an example of be prepared because, especially when you're doing land site work, that you're going to have some unforeseen conditions. And the book we use it was recommended by the program director. It's about risk management. So it's not specifically about claims and changes, but it talks about having a risk matrix and thinking about everything that can go wrong in the project and preparing for it and be prepared to mitigate that. Because, I'm sure any contractor can tell you something always happens and the owners get upset if they think, why do I have to spend all this extra money? But if you can get out ahead of that and make sure you have a plan, that kind of softens the blow. I also was asked at the last minute last year to teach building information modeling. So it wasn't the software side, but it was more the theory, how that all developed, how you create a BIM execution plan, understanding all the contract language that you might need separate. We talked about how different disciplines utilize BIM. So whether, your model. So how do designers use it? How do owners use it? How might a facilities manager use it? And in that class, I actually did a presentation on architects, because not all my students really know what architects do. So kind of put some humor in it, but try to explain, this is how architects think, this is how we're educated, and, to try to give everybody a little bit more understanding of how architects work. And then this fall, I'll be teaching construction methods and material to high school students. So hopefully I'll recover from that one, but it should be interesting. These students will come to the campus and they'll get college credit for it. So it's pretty exciting to start students off, when they're in high school, that they can carry that into whatever profession in the built environment, no matter what career field they'll choose.
Yeah. And I feel like they'll give them a leg up. Like you, I took drafting classes in like middle school, high school, and I only had one class that we actually did like a building section and did all the little components to it. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm used to just like playing with this big form, or like I also did like engineering type software. So I made like a wine bottle opener that could move and animate. But it was like, it's funny remembering like my thoughts with doing a wall section and all those materials coming together to actually like, build the wall. Mm-hmm. And then they don't really go through that much. It's almost like professional practice, where here's a little bit of methods and materials, and then that's all you do once you're in the real world. So I tried to give them a glimpse.
I was lucky when after my first year of architecture school, I got a job with an architect, and it wasn't because of, theory 1 and 2. It was because of what I learned in high school, because I knew how to draw a floor plan. I knew how to use a scale. And again, we were still hand drafting back then. So I knew how to draw a building section, elevations. So, I know a lot of schools are getting rid of that, but I feel really lucky that I was able to do that, because, now I know if you're building something in Revit, it creates your sections for you. So you don't have to really, think so much about what you're doing. It's a little bit easier, but at the same time, I think you lose that knowledge of really thinking, how does this work, when you're actually drawing it?
Yeah. And do you know what the students do after your course in terms of their track? Are they going more a contractor route or engineering?
So my students are mostly non-traditional. The classes are in the evening. So, so there's an associate's degree, but there's also a certificate that's promoted to the trades. So I've had students who are plumbers, electricians, project managers. I had one that was a surveyor that was looking to change careers and go more into an office role. I've had students that hadn't entered the profession yet. One was a bartender, and I had her for a couple classes, and she went on to become an assistant project manager. So there's just a wide range. Very few of my students are just right out of high school who want to go into construction. So I had, I think, 2 students that wanted to continue their education and go into civil engineering. So it's, kind of a broad range. And the students can also matriculate to Morgan State University in Baltimore and move into their construction management program. And some of those credits transfer, which is really nice. So I like that they're non-traditional, because, the ones that have experience, they can speak up to, things they've worked on and share it with the class.
Yeah. And the variety, because that would just be a fun group. Like, right. I don't know, all the classes in architecture school, you kind of have your class, and it's that year, and you just follow and you do the exact same classes. You don't really like integrate with any other like disciplines even. That's like, well, what if I could take an engineering class with structural engineers, or, different things, and how that would change people's perspective on just understanding what we do beyond our own discipline. So,
right. And we've been having talks with the Revit instructor to, if I do teach the BIM class this fall, to bring in some of his students, and not just construction management students, bring in some of the interior design students or the engineering students, so they have an understanding of BIM a little bit beyond Revit and understand why you use it and how it's going to be used. But yeah, it's been really good just, hearing stories. One of my students managed the fleet of trucks that Amazon uses. So he could speak to, when you're trying to have inventory and the struggle with getting inventory, to do repairs on the trucks. How can that compare to being a contractor and trying to get materials out to the site?
Yeah. And I want to jump into the session that I met you at AI National, because you talked about CM practices in the design side. So planning out projects. I know I typically just see a bigger Gantt chart and that's about it. And it's like, okay, you get how many months to do design, but it's like, okay, besides that deliverable, like we could break it up a lot like contractors do with what do you need when and information. So do you have any advice from putting together that presentation and your experience for architects and how to bring the CM strategies you've learned to the design side so we can be more profitable and efficient?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, planning a project. So a lot of times, in my career, we were just given, here's a list of dates. The owner wants our permit by this date. You got to work backwards. Or maybe we had, our SDs are due this date, our DDs are due this date, but there was never a plan on how to get there. And you're just expected to do what you needed to do. So, learning and even, what I've learned from just teaching, planning and scheduling, think about your resources. Do you have the staff to actually make that happen? How are you calculating your durations in your fee schedule? I remember on one job, I got yelled at by our office manager because I was over budget. And I said, should I not finish the project? What am I supposed to do? And I didn't know really how my boss came up with that time to get that work done. And one of the things I've become involved in the past year with the local lean community of practice. And we did a pool planning session, which comes from obviously lean construction, where each, just like in construction, the trades write down, you say, maybe we're going to start in 2 weeks. Where do we need to be? The trades write down what they need to get done to do that. But I went to an activity where it was for architects and engineers. And I found it really difficult because, you were in different roles. You're the architect and the MEP engineers. And in your head, it needs to be done before the, electrical engineer can lay out the lighting. But when you're actually standing there with your Post-its and you really have to talk it over and think about it, it's really hard. And to me, I think that's one of the first things that the profession needs to do is really understand how to plan a project, how to make sure that you can actually make that happen. Is your staff, what's their other project load? Because we all know that, we might have a project in CA or we're waiting on an owner to make a decision on another project. So, kind of like contractors, and I know they get moved around a lot, like in land development, when you have bad weather, you have to kind of put them on other sites because you might not be able to work at that time. So I think that's the first step, is really planning a project, understanding your resources, understanding how everything's connected. I think, strategic management. So it wasn't, that's obviously not limited to construction, but if you're an owner of a firm, it's easy to write on your website, this is our mission, our values, but I've never had any kind of formal discussions in the firms I worked with about how to really get there and what's the expectations of the staff. So, there's something in lean called conditions of satisfaction. So what is your client really expecting? You say, here's a set of drawings to build from. What are you really expected to do? What's the expectation of quality? And, from there, risk management is another big one. The book that I mentioned that we use in our construction claims and changes, the author developed this risk management. So So you go through, and I took that and I actually have been building it for my company. When I go to a webinar and I hear something, I add it to the list. And it's, it is risk, but everything can be a risk. What are your existing conditions? Are you measuring it by hand? Are you having the whole building scanned? Those are kind of risks for the project. I was talking to a fellow architect who now works as a construction manager, and she said the company she works for, before they start construction, they sit down and spend a day and go through all the potential risks in the project. So I don't ever recall that happening when I was an architect, that we really talked about, time for the owner to make decisions. How long is it really going to take us to flesh out a plan? What if we get some feedback and we have to go back? How does that impact the fee? So those are kind of, sort of the main things that I think of based on my experience, how architects can incorporate that and think a little bit more like contractors about planning a project. And granted, design isn't just, start and finish, but, if you think you're going to spend time to do pinups in your office and get feedback, that should all be in your schedule and be in your fee.
Yeah, because a designer may say, well, design's not linear, it's messy. And I'm like, well, you can still organize the messy, but if you stay messy too long, then you don't have time to actually get the documents done. And then you're either staying up late, working weekends, get burned out, or you put out a bad drawing set. And then it just makes everything harder when you're trying to actually build it. So, but if you schedule the fluffiness or the pinups, then you have a start and stop point with it.
Right.
And I don't know how many conversations people have with owners on how long do you need to review something? If something's off to you, do you need 2 weeks to review? Are we okay to proceed? If you're not okay to proceed without sign off, then that could be 2 weeks that you have your whole staff just wide open. And if you don't prepare for it, they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs, and other projects could be drowning. You could help them out and shift people around a little bit.
Right. And we talk about in my planning and scheduling class about, crowding on a job site. So I think the same thing can apply when you're working on a job. And I know I've been in this experience where there's a big deadline, so let's throw everybody at that project. People don't know what's going on. The project manager is trying to do their work and they're trying to make sure this person has something to do. And then everybody's on top of each other. So how do you, really understand where your staff is and, when they're going to be finished? And when I first learned scheduling software, I was like, wow, why don't architects use this? And I know in the AIA presentation, a few people raised their hand that they do use scheduling software. And I think that's great because it really makes you think critically about what you're doing. You just don't have an Excel fee schedule and throw some dates on there and just kind of wish it'll happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to shift over into your own business. So I know you combine planning, problem solving, and management, and help owners, contractors, and design teams. Can you tell me a little more about everything you're doing with your business? I know you hinted at a couple things in your intro.
So it's still a startup. So what I'm doing, a big part of what I'm doing is a lot of marketing and business development. And that's been a struggle for me a little bit because I really had no experience with that. And just understanding how to get your message across and promote yourself and introduce yourself, going to networking events and having to meet people and say, this is what I do. Again, if you're like a school board and you're going to do a school renovation, you probably understand that you will go to a construction manager to assist with that. But if you're a business owner, a lot of times you don't realize that there are people out there that can help you. Or if you're a church, I've worked on church projects where you have a committee and there are accountants and teachers and, they might not understand that that's what they can do. So for me, going, sending cold emails to architects and engineers and saying, hey, if your, client needs someone to help you or help them, manage their project, because not all architects offer that service. And my one project I have right now, it's not super exciting, but it's permit expediting. So, and also we're working on demo permits. So based on my experience working in land development, I had a lot of experience demolishing houses, on sites that were going to be redeveloped. So there's a lot of work involved with that. There's several steps you have to take before you can get your demo permit, working with, say a historic review or getting disconnects for gas, electric. And in that sense, talking with the clients and letting them know, okay, Comcast has to come and disconnect from the buildings, but they have service running through the middle of your site. So they need to go above and beyond. They might need to do some relocations. So, just trying to kind of help them walk through that to understand that it's not just saying disconnect our gas because, the utility might want to relocate the main and take that opportunity to do some bigger infrastructure work. So just letting them know that it's not always as simple on a project. And also, one of my goals is to take what I've learned, in construction management and teaching and try to guide them to just do projects better. Because I think, today actually the AIA sent out a survey about they're trying to connect with the Lean Construction Institute, which is great. So, one thing I always talk with my students about is when you're starting a project, how do you start it off on the right foot so people's expectations are met? I created a handout because somebody asked, what happens in a pre-construction meeting? So I created an agenda and just from my experience, things that, we discuss to try to pass that knowledge on to, some project owners that, hey, before you start the project, let's sit down and talk about, do you want to do partnering or use some aspects of partnering? Who makes decisions, making sure that the right people are making decisions, that everybody knows that. Sitting with the client and saying, okay, you're going to do this project, but are you aware that the construction is just not the building? It's, you have all your entitlements, but then you have to work with the utility companies. How are you going to pick your design team? That your schedule is just not this for construction. It's way bigger. And are they aware of all the things that need to be done and all the decisions they have to make?
Yeah, especially when they're not used to construction to begin with, then right. Even just the decisions you make within the building can be overwhelming for so many people, or even a particular room, let alone any of the site work, utilities, permitting, and everything that comes together. So,
right. Like, what kind of streetlights do you want? And they're probably like, I didn't know I had a choice. Or
yeah, it's like, the one at Sam's Club or the one over here. Pick that one. I love when I get directions based on something else they've seen. Then you have to go digging. But how's it been transitioning from employee to business owner?
Like I said, it's been a little bit of a struggle. I've owned during the recession, I had the opportunity just to start a side gig because I had a neighbor who was, when I was living in Baltimore City, he flipped row houses and just had me do some drawings for him. So my brother said, make sure you get insurance and, create a separate company to protect yourself. So I had a little bit of an idea of, insurance and how to bill people and create, that was my first opportunity to create my first fee schedule and really think about that. So I'm glad I did it. I stopped doing that when I went back to school, but it was a good experience just to understand that. And I have another side gig now where I go to markets and festivals and sell my art. So that was a good experience too, because I had to understand about, marketing. And, I still struggle with understanding social media and making sure the word gets out. And I can spend half a day sometimes writing social media posts. And so that's kind of the biggest thing is really, I don't have any employees, but it's more just really understanding marketing and, getting your message out to people. And I'm still learning, but one of the good things is, so I live on the Mason-Dixon line, so I operate in Maryland and Pennsylvania. So I kind of have to do double duty with marketing, but I met a lot of great people. I got involved with the Mid-Atlantic Lean Community of Practice. I've been attending some of those events, which have been good. Around the Harrisburg area, there's the Keystone Contractors Association has a series called Improving Project Outcomes that I've gone to. And I really enjoy those because they try to bring, owners, contractors, and designers all together to talk about, improvement. So that's just something that now is, I don't know if I want to say my passion, but something that I've really been developing much more interest in. And I've also been going through, getting my third-party certification as a WBE. I just got my Pennsylvania Diverse Business Enterprise certification and, filling out a lot of forms and, what's the balance sheet I have to submit, for the fifth time for all these applications. So, and, always looking for opportunities, researching architecture firms and engineering firms, seeing what kind of work they do and trying to connect. So it's, we talked about at the beginning, it is, you have real highs and real lows, but at the same time, it's, all me. So it's pretty exciting. And, thinking about trying to keep an open mind that maybe I might shift a little bit in, what my goals are, but, just looking for every opportunity.
Yeah. And I think keeping an open mind, just because you never know if an opportunity will lead you somewhere. I guess like when you found the job that you were doing more CA work and you hadn't done as much, and then that kind of fostered you shifting into construction management. So you never know. But I know you mentioned a couple organizations. Has any one of those organizations or others left an impact on your career?
I think the biggest one is NAWIC, the National Association of Women in Construction. So I didn't join until I really kind of formally started working in construction, although, I could have joined as an architect, but I wish I would have found that 30 years ago. I think because it's, women are so rare, and I see a lot of changes, since I graduated college 30 years ago, but it's, just a nice support system. And when I was in land development, women were even less common, because most engineers are guys. 99% of the people out on site were guys, but it was good just to, kind of being around women and talking about some of the struggles we have. And it was also, some of the women I know have been very supportive and encouraging each other to, be on the board of your chapter. Or I was, a member said, hey, do you want to be a region chair for this committee? And I ended up serving as a national chair for marketing, which again, that kind of helped me when I launched my firm because I understood a little bit about how to market an organization. And I know the chapter I'm in Baltimore is very supportive. We do a camp for girls for construction for a week. So that's coming up at the end of the month, but it's really great just to introduce girls. Hey, you can be an equipment operator. You can be an electrician. You can, be an architect. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest ones that, there is some learning too, but it's, when you're kind of the only woman out on site, it's good to have some support. You meet other women who are, maybe facing the same issues, and they talk about, some of the same issues that you're concerned about. Yeah,
I know I've only attended one NAWIC happy hour here locally in Pittsburgh. And we just did the women or the girls camp. I am blanking out on the name. The girls camp we had was last week.
Okay, great.
But it's always fun to see just identifying you can do anything. It doesn't matter your gender, your age, where you are, what you're doing. Like, I always love supporting those. And then I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question. And it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
So I have 3 pieces of advice that I was thinking. The first one is to participate. So in my classes, I have a handout I give to them, and it's a list of all the organizations that I'm aware of. And I encourage my students to get involved in any professional organization, whether as a student or those that are working, get involved. And, we talk about the importance of connecting with others. I talk about how pretty much every job except for my first job after my first year in architecture school, I've gotten because I've known somebody. I've never had good luck with sending out resumes. By expanding your network and, getting involved, that you learn about what's going on in your industry. So for an example, after COVID, transformers were in short supply. So I knew that because at the time I was in a group for home builders through my job. And, we talked about challenges in that industry and just, how everyone talks about businesses based on relationships. Also learning that, always be a student and continue to educate yourself. So not just limited to your profession, but other disciplines. So we talked earlier about, construction management. If you're an architect, understanding how engineers work, how facilities managers work, and encouraging them to attend seminars and webinars and conferences. So, go to the AIA convention. Maybe you don't go every year necessarily, but you just meet people. You're introduced to a lot of new ideas. I know when I went to grad school, I learned so much, just stuff that I didn't learn in architecture school. And I really enjoyed it. The student loan I don't enjoy, but just learning, all these different ideas and how you can apply those. And then finally, talking about preparation. So if, a student says, I want to own my own firm one day, I would say start planning now. There's a lot of resources like the Small Business Administration and their SCORE program. Start thinking about, if you have a firm, what you would do, because you never know when there might be an opportunity that comes up. So for me, right at the beginning of the recession, my neighbor said, hey, will you draw some permit plans for this row house? And, somebody, if you might find yourself unemployed, how can you take your skills and just at least start a company that you can support yourself? Maybe it'll grow into something, maybe it's only temporary, but you never know how you can kind of leverage all your knowledge and, start writing up, in your head. Again, it's kind of like planning. You think it needs to be done, but when you start writing out all your experience and your knowledge and, the projects you've worked on, you really realize that you've done a lot. And I think that can be applied to, I know in NAO we talk about imposter syndrome, but I think once you really start writing everything down, whether or not you end up starting a business, that you really realize that you do know a lot and that you are qualified. And I think that really just helps you be prepared for, your future, that maybe I'll start a firm, maybe I won't, maybe I'll, move up in a firm and have to be that person in charge, and having those skills. I've been learning a lot of those the past year and a half. And I wish I kind of would have started several years ago to really understand that portion.
Yeah, all the ins and outs and different things you need to know. But if anybody's interested in your help on a project, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So my website is LuzerenneConsulting.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and, if anybody, wanted to just sit down and tell me about their project, and I could help fill in, what they might need. My firm can be from start to finish, or, like what I'm doing now, just helping out on permitting or helping out on bidding.
Yeah. And I will leave links below, so then it's super easy for everybody to find your website and find you on LinkedIn and your handle for Instagram. So
great. Thanks.
But it was fantastic talking to you, Tara. I know I love the CA process, so I was fascinated that you shifted from architect to construction management in everything you're doing. So
great. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.